Hello and welcome to Colonial Canada. Today, a really short video to introduce you to the big picture of the course and your most basic expectations that you should be taking from this course. What you should be expecting to see, what you should be expecting to do, and really, in a really basic sense, what you should be thinking about. So I just want to cover the very, very basics here. Everything I'm describing here is described in more detail in the syllabus, but I'm really trying to just highlight what you should be emphasizing as we go forward in the next few weeks. This is a spring course. This is going to go really quickly, and it's important that you know right from the beginning what we're trying to do in this course. So we can think about this as having three components. The first component we'd like to talk about is just the basic story. What happened? We'll see a story unfold here. It's a big and complex story, and there's all kinds of stories within that story, but the basic outline of what happened over this broad-ranging time period. I'm not even going to talk about time periods here today. Just this is early modern era where European countries are colonizing the Americas and that relationship with indigenous people and how that all unfolds and what the indigenous people are doing and what the European empires are doing. Just that basic, simple story. So you'll encounter that in two basic ways. One, through the online textbook. So that's the book from the BC open text platform. It's available online. And in the syllabus, I outline particular sections that you should read. If you want to read more than that, that's absolutely fine. And certainly I encourage you to read as much as possible. But in a short course like this, I think having limitations on that are probably a good thing, right? And the second thing is I'll be offering screencast-like videos like this one, which in many ways are meant to be kind of general discussions of the story, but they're also slightly more targeted towards your readings. In other words, they're designed to set up your readings in some kind of general fashion. So that provides some context for you. We'll talk about this more later, but this stuff is the kind of stuff that will be showing up in the exam. This is the kind of stuff that I'll expect you to understand the big picture and some of the important stories going on within that and how they relate to some particular stories. But as I said, those videos are as much meant to set up the forums as anything else. The second thing we can now look at then is those forums themselves. This is absolutely the heart of the course. This is discussion. It's online. You're going to be writing, not talking, but it's the discussion part of the course. It's from a regular history course, this would be the seminar. This is where you're sitting in a room with 20 people talking, except we're not actually in the same room. We're on our keyboards having a conversation. I can't emphasize enough that I'm really looking to you to engage in conversations. I'm not just wanting you to kind of get on the screen and say things because that's what you're supposed to do. Really, part of what you're being graded on in the forums is your ability to engage with your classmates, to discuss the issues. So I'd like to see people constructively criticizing each other. And a lot of students are afraid of criticism. They're afraid this is kind of a bad thing. You don't need to be rude. This can all be incredibly polite. You read it one way, I read it a different way. Let's talk about why that happened. Let's talk about how we arrived at those different conclusions. That's really the heart of what we do in history. What we do in history is look at arguments and looking at evidence and whether the evidence supports those arguments. And that's really kind of the basic story here. So I encourage you to try to push yourself and to try to push your classmates in these discussions. What are we looking for in these forums? We're looking for three things that I would emphasize right now. We're looking for the argument of each piece. Now, in your textbook, oh, right, the textbook, this is your textbook, Visions. Do not buy it online. It's a custom edition for the course. Do not buy it online. This is the one you want. It's the custom edition Brock University down here at the bottom. It has the readings you will need for this course and no others. And the standard version, the version that you might buy on Amazon or whatever, only has about half of them and has a bunch of things that you won't need. So don't buy that one, buy this one. It's available at the bookstore and so on. You've seen announcements about this elsewhere. We want you to read some excerpts, and we want you to read mostly secondary excerpts. And I want you to focus on what each author is saying. And what you'll see is that each author is addressing a general topic, and your weekly readings are organized by topics. So for example, you'll have some people talking about the place of Nova Scotia in the American Revolution. We'll get there in a few weeks. And it asks a pretty simple question about why Nova Scotia did not participate in the American Revolution. It's a British colony like the other British colonies, but it doesn't join the revolution. So there's some historians have discussed this, a number of historians have discussed this, and they've emphasized different things. Some of them have arrived at different conclusions, and that's what we really want you to do. We want you to look at each excerpt and identify what each author is emphasizing, arguing in their discussion of that issue. And then as we move along, we'll be moving along towards synthesizing this in some kind of fashion. And you'll be writing an essay where you might, for example, you might actually write your essay on that chapter where you can say that, we have 4 or 5 authors talking about this, and author X emphasizes that factor, and author Y emphasizes that factor. And that's the kind of thing we'd like you to take from this course. So looking for the arguments that the historians. So that way, that allows us to understand that history is kind of a conversation. It's a conversation between historians, and historians emphasize different features of the stories. They read the evidence differently. They interpret things differently. An awful lot of people think history is simply what happened, and some things are pretty straightforward that way. We know World War I happened. No doubt about that. We know the Holocaust happened. No doubt about that. We know the 7 Years' War happened, to get to content in this course. There's no doubt about that. But what it meant, what the outcomes were, what it meant to people at the time, what their strategies were, what they hoped to achieve, those things are much more complex, and that's where interpretation comes into play. And that's where we're looking at different historians and different ways of explaining those stories. And that's really what we're going to look at here, getting at those arguments of those individual authors. Second thing we'll be looking at is the evidence. Looking at the evidence that the historians use to connect, to support the argument. I argue that the sun will shine today, and the evidence I use is that, look, there's the sun going through the sky. Historians ultimately have to do the exact same thing. They can maintain that something happened for some reason, but they need to show you evidence that convinces you of that point. And so we'll be looking at, in our discussions, in our forum discussions, and ultimately in our papers too, but in these forum discussions, we'll be looking for you to identify the argument and to get at the evidence to see if you think the evidence supports that argument. And generally it does, but then you start to get into questions of looking at 2 historians or 3 historians and their arguments and their evidence and saying, well, I like that one better because that evidence works better, or whatever. And that's the kind of thing we'll be working towards in our papers. The third thing we'll be looking for in our forum discussions are connections to the textbook readings, connections to the general picture. So in other words, again, to kind of run with this example of Nova Scotia and the American Revolution, your textbook talks about the American Revolution in general, it talks about Nova Scotia in particular, and it offers a kind of general picture of that story. So we'll be looking for you to make connections to between the readings, between the readings in your textbook and the source book here, and the general story being told in your online textbook. And that's probably the least important of the 3, although it's certainly generally important for you to understand that general sense of context, because really that's what that's all about, the big picture surrounding the smaller story that you're reading about. And that's important to understand. But certainly, as we move forward towards the essays, it's the argument and the evidence, the first 2 points I mentioned, that will be far, far more important. The third thing we're going to be looking at or the third dimension of the course, will be writing. You're going to do a lot of writing in this course. Most of the writing will be done in the forums. Because it's a summer course, because it's on this rapidly accelerated rate, you're in effect doing 2 weeks every week, which means you're doing a full week of course in 3 or 4 days, depending on how you calculate the week. And you'll be expected to do a couple of forum posts in there. So you'll be expected to be doing a fair bit of reading and a fair bit of writing just in the forums alone. That'll have a payoff though, because that forum writing goes directly towards your shorter assignment, which is the second piece of writing you'll be doing. which is more or less, and this is explained in more detail in the course syllabus, but more or less a reflection on one of your forum posts. But it's also meant to set up the third component, which is the major essay. And that's where you'll take a single chapter from this book and write an essay about the excerpts in that book. And I can't stress this enough, and again, I'll explain this all in the syllabus and so on, but no extra research. You don't need to go watch documentaries on this thing or anything. You're going to read some texts, all coming from here, and I want you to describe and discuss those texts. It's pretty straightforward. And in fact, really, in many ways, most of the course revolves around talking about and writing about the texts in this course. So that's really, really important. Third and final piece of writing you'll be doing is the exam, and that's a take-home exam. There will be a kind of short answer dimension to that, and there'll be a single essay question. You'll have some choice there. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but there'll be a question there, and it will be less on this and more on the general background from those lecture videos and from the textbook, more of that kind of stuff. This will be stuff you can talk about in the essay, in the exam, but there won't be a question that asks you to, in chapter 4, Bob says this, tell me about that. That's not going to be happening, but certainly you can, as you're talking about the topic, whatever it is in that exam question, and it's useful to point to stuff that's coming from this book, that's certainly a smart thing for you to be doing. Fair warning. So I've been talking about all the writing you're going to be doing, all the reading you're going to be doing. It's a lot going on. This course goes really quickly, and it's a history course. That's what we do in history. We read and we write and we talk about it. That's really all we do. You're going to have to do a lot. This course will keep you busy in the month of May. You'll have a lot to get done. And as always, much of that gets squeezed towards the end. Now, most of the reading and most of the assignments are designed to push you towards a particular outcome, towards a particular essay and the exam. So it's not like you're just going to be covering things and then doing wholly new things at the end for your paper. It's not like you're going to be doing a research paper where you need to come up with something on your own. It'll be what you've been working on in the forums, in the discussions, and so on. This will build in that general direction. So that should work. But you need to know, shouldn't hammer on the desk when I'm recording. You need to know that it's very important to get a lot of reading done and a lot of writing done. This course will keep you busy. Can't stress that enough. Having said that, I think you'll learn a lot. You'll learn a lot about early Canadian history, that's for sure. It's kind of a big picture of the story. But more particularly, because we're going to be so intensively working on historians and how historians present arguments and how they use evidence to support those arguments, this is the kind of course that can help you in other courses, help you think about those kinds of general questions. Because certainly when I teach 3rd and 4th year courses, I see a lot of pretty good students. They're good enough to be in honors, to be taking those difficult 4th year courses, but they're still not really good at picking out arguments. Still not really good at showing how evidence supports arguments. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what we do. And this is really important. We're living, as you all know, we're living in this era of fake news where stories get promulgated in the media, but they have no evidence to support them. They're just fake stories. That's a problem. That's a real problem. And so having the critical skills to read and think about and look for the evidence, to bring all that together in an intelligent, informed package is a really, really valuable skill. It will separate you from a lot of people and in a good way. So there's lots of good outcome here, and I think also as a student you'll benefit as well. I think there's lots of good lessons for you in this course, and I think the content's really, really interesting. I think an awful lot of people think Canadian history isn't very interesting because we don't have a big revolution, or we do, except it turns out to be another country's revolution. But there are substantial and exciting events going on here. But there's also just kind of simple events going on here that tell us a lot about who we are as Canadians and why we've evolved in the particular fashion that we have, why our country has evolved in the particular fashion that it has. One of the things, and we'll talk about this at much greater length as we go, but one of the things that I like to talk about in this course is that in many ways, the country of Canada that emerges in the 20th century and in the 21st century is very, very much a product of the 18th century, very, very much a product of some basic developments that take place in the 18th century. And you might think, well, yeah, everything's connected in the past somehow, but I'm talking about pretty fundamental things here. I'm talking about basic constitutional arrangements of our government and how they're shaped in the 18th century. Some really, really basic issues like that. In other words, some patterns that are emerging in the 18th century remain with us. They become deeply entrenched patterns in the country. Some are not so good. Some are very good. Some of them, I think, help us understand why Canada is a successful democracy and why it's a successful multicultural democracy. And that's really, really important in the modern age. So I think there's lots of good lessons in this course. Hope you'll have fun. I hope you'll learn a lot. And I hope you'll write really terrific essays and walk away saying, gosh, that was kind of interesting and kind of helpful. Take care, and we'll see you in a whole pile of future videos and some forum discussions. Look forward to meeting you all online. Take care. Bye-bye.